This is Eric King from KingWorldNews.com, and joining us in this segment is Harry Markopolos, the gentleman who broke the $50 billion Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme wide open. The interview is incredible, and I hope you enjoy. Joining us now at the New York Hard Asset Show is Harry Markopolos. Harry, this is an unbelievable story. I know you feel like you failed. I listened to you talk, but and that's fine. I understand where you were coming from, but I think everybody around considered you sort of a hero because you had the guts to go in. And I think in retrospect, listening to you, it was almost like you go, wow, looking back, I endangered my family. I don't know about this journey I was on, but you kind of helped break this Bernie Madoff thing wide open, and it's just unbelievable. There's a movie coming out. There's a book coming out. What was the adventure like? I mean, it started at the beginning where you first were going, wait, something's not right here. These numbers are not adding up, and you said you did it very quickly.
It took 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
And that's not the record, by the way. I have a buddy, a very decent human being, much more brilliant than I am. He was head of equity derivatives research at Citigroup, one of the nicest men you'll ever meet, and he has an IQ north of 200. His name is Leon Gross, and he left the bank in November. They had some staff cutbacks, trying to stay solvent. Unfortunately, they let him go. It took him 30 seconds to figure it out. And he was willing to cooperate with the SEC, and all they had to do was call him. I gave them his contact information. They never picked up the phone. He's in New York. All they had to do was call him up. He would have had to go through channels and gotten permission from his firm, but he would have cooperated. There's no firm on Wall Street that would not have helped put Bernie Madoff down. If you look at who the victims were not, they were not the major Wall Street investment banks. They knew, or they suspected. They didn't really know. They just knew it wasn't transparent. It was too good to be true. They were highly suspicious. They never took the time to investigate. But there were certain people in the derivatives field that had more than a suspicion, and they were really good at math like I was, and probably better at math. And I listed those as references for the government to call. They never called a single person. They never conducted a proper investigation. And that they have to be held responsible for. And unfortunately, a lot of those people have already left the agency, and many will leave by the time the SEC Inspector General's report comes out. And I think anybody who's left over, who bears any sense of responsibility for this tragedy, I think Mary Schapiro is going to deal with them harshly. I think it's fair to say we're somewhat of a critic of Mary Schapiro when you look in the past, but now you're saying she's coming in, she's cleaning up the SEC, the changes appear to be going well. You like what you see, you're cautiously optimistic. Is the hesitation that because I think some of us, when we looked at the SEC, kind of looked at it and went, this just looks like an old boys club designed to protect, hired by Wall Street to protect Wall Street. It's not functioning the way it's supposed to function. It's hiding this stuff. It's not uncovering it. It's almost a joke. Is that fair to say that the old SEC was like that? I would say that the SEC was a very bad joke on the American public. It was 3,500 people not doing their jobs, wasting $900 million in taxpayer funds every year, looking the other way, protecting financial predators from investors. And they were supposed to be doing the opposite. They were supposed to be protecting investors from financial predators, but they became captive to the industry because the industry lobbied Congress and defanged the SEC over a period of multiple decades. The SEC didn't become bad overnight. It didn't happen under the Bush administration only. It happened under multiple administrations, under multiple presidencies, and it happened. They haven't done a big case there since the mid-'80s, since Ivan Boesky and Dennis Levine.
Right.
And Michael Milken. They haven't done the big cases for decades now. It was a slow process of defanging the SEC, and now we have a non-functional agency that would need to improve several-fold just to become dysfunctional. So dysfunctional has to be their near-term objective, and then they have to become functional. So it's crawl,
well, Aaron,
walk,
let me stop
run.
you for a minute. Defanged. When you use that word, I found it interesting. Was that done on purpose? Did
Yes.
Wall Street, were they involved to slowly defang this organization, as you say?
Yes.
Okay.
And there were places they would never let them go. Every time that the SEC tried to regulate over-the-counter products, they were told no. And the lead aider and abetter was Alan Greenspan.
Right.
And so you had people at the highest levels of government under multiple administrations, and the guy kept getting reappointed. Alan Greenspan will go down in history as the worst Fed chairman ever. My nickname for him is Mr. Bubbles. He never met a crisis he didn't want to inflate his way out of to cause the next crisis. He never instilled moral hazard in investors. He aided and abetted moral hazard. Humpty Dumpty is now so big that he may not be able to be put together again. And the government thinks they can rescue everybody, and they certainly have tried to date so far.
Right.
But I think we're running out of lifeboats.
Well, I read for 6 years from a speech that Greenspan gave in Belgium, and I think I wore out the listeners, but it was where he was talking about the fact that the banks make these off-table bets in the form of derivatives. And listeners have heard this certainly enough times, but at that time it was roughly $110 trillion with a T. And the fact that
systemically, the taxpayers stand ready to bail them out. And if the banks win, they keep the winnings. But if they lose, then these taxpayers are ready to bail them out. But I took that as a warning from him, because 5 times he said, we stand ready to create money without limit. And it wasn't covered by anybody. Nobody covered that speech. Basically, I kind of rode that until this thing blew up. How bad was Alan Greenspan? Because you say he was the worst, but what was he doing? What was this, a setup? I mean, this was obvious.
The Federal Reserve needs to have every regulatory power stripped from it, because who appoints the Federal Reserve presidents? The banks. It's of the banks, for the banks, by the banks. It's nothing but a self-regulatory organization and answers to no government. It needs to have the regulatory put back into the government. You can have them set monetary policy independent, keep the Fed governors setting monetary policy, but remove them from the regulatory framework because they were incapable of regulating. They were regulating the industry they came from, and they proved incompetent at that. It was an insiders club, and it worked to the advantage of the bankers, bailing out the bankers, but it worked to the disadvantage of the taxpayers. We're on the hook now for $12 trillion in government guarantees and backstops and credit line facilities.
Right.
My children and your children are going to pay for my generation's mistakes because we allowed this to continue on. It's time for a total rewrite of the regulatory framework in this nation, and the Federal Reserve cannot be allowed to regulate the banks as bad as the SEC was, and they were terrible. Unfortunately for this country, they are the best regulator that we have, and they're the best in the world at securities regulation. That tells you how bad the standard is, and they were hundreds of times better than the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the most corrupt, most blind regulator that we have in the arena, and they need to be stripped of their power. They're beyond incompetent. They're to the point of total corruption.
Well, Jimmy Rogers says that they're unethical, that this is immoral, that we should abolish the Federal Reserve and go a different direction. I mean,
I like the independent monetary policy setting. I think they can retain that. That's fine. I just don't want them regulating. I want that.
But should the U.S. Treasury print the money? Like in the Constitution, it talks about that. Why did the Federal Reserve come into existence? Who are these people? Who owns this? As you said, it's not really a government agency, is it? It's private, and so
it's quasi-independent. I think you need to keep the independence. I don't mind having them set monetary policy. I don't think I want the government doing that because they've proven that they cannot spend what we earn, that they only know how to deficit spend. So I wouldn't trust them. I don't think they're the answer. I'd rather keep the Federal Reserve in charge of the monetary policy, but not have them do anything regulatory because they've proven beyond corrupt at that. They're not punishing anybody, are they?
No.
They're not shaming anybody. They're not clawing back the bonuses, are they? How come we have a clawback for the Madoff investors, but we don't have a clawback for the corrupt CEOs of the money center banks and the Wall Street investment banks?
Well, I have a question for you. What about Franklin Raines? And he runs Fannie Mae into the ground. And does anybody talk about this guy? And
There's no shame.
There's no shame. How much money did he make? Hundreds of millions? 200 million?
And how much are we out?
Well, this is my point.
We don't even know how many hundreds of billions were out because of Fannie Mae.
But then they come on the air and they say, well, nobody saw this coming. Baloney. Bunches of us saw it coming.
Yes.
We said the system is insane. This is madness.
Yes.
The leverage is tremendous. And you know derivatives. So maybe there's a responsible way, but I never liked derivatives. Are derivatives responsible, or should we get rid of derivatives? Or talk to me about derivatives for a minute.
I'd say the listed derivatives keep because they're transparent and you can regulate them and you know who the counterparty risk is contained. The over-the-counter derivatives, get rid of.
Okay.
Don't allow over-the-counter derivatives to trade in the U.S. And if they do trade, say that they're totally unprotected. If they fail, the users of them fail, it doesn't matter. No bailouts for over-the-counter products anywhere, anytime, no matter what.
When I was interviewing Dr. Anna Schwartz, she talked about the bailouts and said that this is not the way to go. We shouldn't be bailing out any of these failed institutions, and that we're leaving this to the taxpayers, which was really the message that you just gave. Should we not have bailed out any of these institutions as a country? Meaning, should we have just let it fail? And because Jeremy Grantham wrote about that just now in his quarterly piece. You read that. Okay, well, he said,
I know Jeremy pretty well.
Well, okay, so did you read the latest quarterly piece where he talks about that? Okay, was it cleansing? He said, look, we'll clean it out. We'll get all this stuff. People will buy it for pennies on the dollar, and then we can start the recovery. We can start the rebound. It would have been really bad. It would have been a collapse, even worse, but we would have cleansed it out. Now it's a long Japan-like journey of, 2 decades of hell, or who knows what's in front of us.
I support Jeremy Grantham's position. We told the Japanese not to do what they did, and now we're repeating what mistakes they made.
Correct.
And we're prolonging the agony for and the American public is going to suffer.
Yes.
The only way to start the road to recovery is to hit rock bottom and cleanse the system. And the only way to do that is to nationalize the banks, zero out the shareholders, and make the bondholders feel the pain too. Make them take haircuts and reinstill moral hazard into this nation and take us away from socialism and back toward capitalism and free and open, transparent markets. And that's the only way to do it, because the government's lying to us now. They're not supporting mark-to-market, and so they're basically giving the green light to the banks to lie about their balance sheets once again.
Correct.
And keep in mind that there's two balance sheets that every bank has these days, the big ones. They have one offshore and they have one onshore. And the leverage ratios that you see published, like 20 to 30 to 35 to 1, it's not true, because they're not bringing the off-balance sheet contingent liabilities onto those onshore, on-balance sheet.
Correct, but aren't they also
offshore.
Accrediting goodwill now? And so it's
Yes.
it's phony. The books are phony still.
The books are cooked.
Okay.
And supposedly Sarbanes-Oxley eliminated the cooked